You're listening to Skate of Thrones, your go-to podcast for dialed-in LA Kings coverage.
Welcome back to Skate of Thrones, the podcast that dials in on the Los Angeles Kings. As always, I'm your host, Casey Kasliner, as the Kings pick up a much-needed overtime victory here on Saturday evening against the St. Louis Blues. The Kings played them 2 consecutive games, both games at home, and the Kings win tonight in overtime 2-1. Quinton Byfield with the game winner on a wrist shot, got it cleanly, no traffic at all, less than half a minute through overtime, gets the winner, a big one for Quinton Byfield, scored on Wednesday against the Blues in what was a 3-2 shootout loss for LA, and Darcy Kuemper getting his 3rd straight start tonight, and a big one for the Kings. Kings heading into today had lost 5 straight games, 2 of which coming after regulation, so they had points in 2 of those games, but a tough stretch, losing to Chicago, of course losing to the Blues a couple of times through that stretch, and playing the Blues multiple times this week, allowing the Kings to kind of learn more about them. And of course, the big storyline in this game was Andrei Kuzmenko making his LA Kings debut. He was the lone trade pickup for Rob Blake and company, coming in over from the Flyers. He only played 7 games with Philly after being traded already multiple times this year. And he spoke in the post-game press conference and really emphasized how kind of tired he is of having to travel around, but was with the Calgary Flames before that, and known as an offensive threat, but not necessarily a big scorer, although he did play pretty well in his short stint in Philly, had 5 points on 2 goals and 3 assists in 7 games with the Flyers, comes over to LA and is immediately stuck not only on the first line, but on the first power play unit as well. And the Kings had 2 power plays in this game, did not score on either of them, but I think one thing that really impressed me from Kuzmenko was his creativity in this game and his ability to sort of do a lot of different things. He was turning defense into offense, streaking up the ice, and really creating a lot of good chances off the rush. And he's not credited with the point tonight, but he did have some good contributions, especially down the stretch for the Kings. And LA was really not good in this game early on. It was all Blues to start. The Kings, I believe, only had 2 shots in the first period, and through like the first half of the first period, they only had 1 shot, and they finally got a good goal. We'll break into that in a moment, but Kuzmenko appeared initially a little bit disconnected from the offense, and you would expect that from a guy like Kuzmenko, who not only is new to the team, but didn't even have a chance to practice with the Kings. And sort of a lot of banter in the press conference was about how Kuzmenko didn't really even know, some of his teammates, of course, knows of them, but didn't have the chance to formally practice. And so a big turnaround for Kuzmenko, and obviously he's, an established player in this league and has moved around before, but of course, big adjustment for him, but it's a good debut for him overall. And Jim Hiller raved about him in the post-game press conference, was really impressed with him, said he can play on the bumper or net front, has really good hands, and is very hopeful that he'll adjust and really confident that he will. And it's a big opportunity for Kuzmenko to kind of settle in a role, and the Kings needed to make a trade, and there was a lot of criticism that the Kings didn't take a bigger swing, but to be honest, the Kings were not going to get Mikko Rantanen, and Kuzmenko being on the board and trading a 3rd-round pick for him adds some depth in their offense, and maybe he's not the biggest goal scorer, but as an offensive threat, especially near the net, he maybe can awaken their power play, as the Kings are not a big power play team in this league. And we know that Kuzmenko, as a Canuck in his career, was a pretty good power play goal scorer, had 14 power play goals in Vancouver, and a lot of them were around the net with deflections, and he's good at getting open. And so that power play unit, at least the first one, was Drew Doughty, Adrian Kempe, Kopitar, Fiala, and Kuzmenko. They went 0 for 2, but had some good looks. And I feel like early on in this game, up until really the end of the second period, Kuzmenko, like I mentioned, not only was not super productive, but just a little bit disconnected. And to my point earlier, the Kings only have about 140 power play opportunities this year, which is the fewest in the NHL. So adding a guy like Kuzmenko should help that and scoring goals on that as well. But we saw in the past Gabe Vilardi, Victor Arvidsson kind of having that role on the power play around the net. And so Kuzmenko coming in as that could definitely add some spark into the lineup. But it felt like on their first power play, at least, the Kings got some dangerous looks and just couldn't find the right shot. And I think for awakening a guy like Kuzmenko on the power play, you want to get a lot of shots on the net and hope for a good deflection. But he had some good passes, especially one spinning backhand pass to Kempe. And Joel Hofer did a pretty good job tonight for the Blues coming in. And that first goal the Kings had, we'll go to that. It was only, I believe, their second shot of the game, but it was from Kopitar, who got a nice deflection from Drew Doughty from the point. Kings went up 1-0, and honestly, kind of a lucky start for him after not playing well prior to that. And Mikey Anderson got the secondary assist, and that brought Drew Doughty and Andrei Kopitar up to 307 goals all-time as a forward defenseman duo from a assist and goal-scoring standpoint, and that is the third all-time, and in great company behind Wayne Gretzky and Paul Coffey, and then Sidney Crosby and Chris Letang, and right ahead of Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito. And so, yeah, the Kings had 2 shots on goal in the first period, but a lead. And I really was liking the depth in this game, especially the fourth line. Hellenius, Jeannot, and Turcotte really vibing well early on that fourth line. I also like the third line as well with Laferriere, Byfield, and Fiala. And we would see later on that Byfield would score the game-winning goal. And he also scored, like I mentioned, in the midweek game. And so the Kings actually appear to have extended their lead with Vladislav Gavrikov scoring, but the goal was waved off because Byfield was offsides. But Gavrikov kind of did something that I appreciated, and that's just keep shooting. I mean, I don't even know if he meant to take a shot, but he forced the puck toward the net, and it went in. But the Kings got a little bit unlucky with the offside call. On the defensive side of things, just moving along in this game, I felt like the Kings did a pretty good job overall. I mean, only allowing 1 goal to St. Louis, and kind of an unlucky break for the Kings as Nick Leddy gets his first goal of the year, the defenseman, and obviously a big one for him. But for LA, I thought the top 4 defensemen did a pretty good job. I wasn't particularly impressed from Edmondson and Clark on the third pairing. I know that Clark's been a very big player in terms of talks recently, especially with the trade deadline, but he was not moved. And so I think, not the best game. I thought Edmondson was playing pretty sloppy as well. But the Blues tied it up 4 minutes through the third period, and a good screen from Zach Bolduc allowed Leddy to get it through, and just an unlucky break for Kemper, who's been, obviously a very good goalie behind this defense, and kind of rough play for Brant Clark, to my point, who kind of was, couldn't clear the puck, and kind of just a rough break for him on the forecheck, and so I wasn't super pleased with that. But that's where we kind of saw Kuzmenko warm up in that third period. He hit the crossbar, he kind of did a lot, just doing a little bit of everything, up the ice, playing hard, checking pretty well. And one interesting stat is the Kings and Blues combined for 22 shots through the first 2 periods, and that is the fewest combined shots on goal in a Kings game since at least 2015-16. I saw that stat online and thought that, wow, that's really interesting. So just a really dormant game offensively. And we saw in the first matchup, it was a lot more open-ended offensively, and the Kings obviously had that game in the back of their minds, especially to the loss to St. Louis on the first of the month, 4-1. And so the Blues had a bit of ownage over the Kings heading into tonight, and the Kings did a good job of responding. In the press conference, we talked to Adrian Kempe and Kuzmenko, and then, of course, Jim Hiller. I thought Kempe talked well about, St. Louis as a team, kind of learning about who they are, playing them now 3 times in 8 days. It was a very physical game, and he appreciated the skill from Kuzmenko. Obviously, a player that is going to do a lot for you. He's kind of like a high-value, low-risk player, I feel like, and he showed his skill a lot, especially net front. And I think with, Kuzmenko, and this was talked about a bit in the press conference, but when you add a new player to the system, you want to get them up to speed on the playbook and, the whole system, but you also don't want them to overthink. And I think Kuzmenko did a really good job of not overthinking tonight, brand new to the lineup, not having a formal practice with the team, but kind of just played his game. And we know his game is it's pretty predictable. He's a tried and true player in this game, and he's not a big scorer, and was pretty dormant early on in this game, but I think communication was big for him. And obviously there is a bit of a language barrier. He's Russian. He had a little bit of trouble in the press conference, and of course with NHL players that aren't Russian, there might be a little bit of a difference as well, but you could tell he was communicating well with Anže Kopitar, Adrian Kempe, and others, especially during that power play unit coming out, and I thought that was really beneficial, and I think it'll really benefit the Kings and Kuzmenko earlier on. And I think, another big theme I saw in this game was just Quinton Byfield finding his shot. Obviously he's been sort of a highly controversial player, not really for any reason other than, he got a big contract in the offseason and he just hasn't always produced, didn't score a single goal in February, just with, a good amount of assists, but he's a guy you want to rely on for goals, is what I'm trying to say. And, he had a, kind of up and down season so far up to this point, but now goals in back-to-back games, you can't really ask for much more out of Byfield, and I think for him, that clutch ability and finding that wrist shot, being confident to rip one, especially with, space, and so that was big. Kuzmenko was very high energy in the press conference, talked about the chemistry, and said it's okay that he doesn't necessarily know everyone, very well yet. He wants to win, preparation is important, and he's going to learn that. And like I mentioned, Jim Hiller is very impressed with him as well, and was impressed with Quinton Byfield, and said that, he had to face adversity in this game, took some hits, beat the goalie Hofer cleanly. Talked about Muvarari not being in the lineup tonight, said he's been good and has been a little bit up and down. The Kings were with 12 forwards and 6 defensemen. We know they've gone to the 11-7, but, adding Kuzmenko certainly helps. And we'll see how the lines move around, especially with him in the lineup and, having time to practice with the team officially as time goes on. But a big one for the Kings, and it's going to be a big stretch for them, as they're going to play Vegas tomorrow. So just imagine, for Kuzmenko, he comes to LA, immediately has to play, and then they have a back-to-back going to Vegas. They're going to hop on a flight over to Las Vegas and play the Golden Knights. And, of course, the Kings played the Knights not too long ago on the 24th of February and got a dominant 5-2 win. But that's immediately where the losing streak started, after that game against Vancouver losing, and then dominated by Dallas, St. Louis, and Chicago, being outscored in that stretch 15-4. And so the Kings are certainly going to want to make sure they play hard against Vegas. It's a very close race right now in the standings, in the wild card, as well as the division race. But the Kings defense did a great job tonight overall. Darcy Kemper, 19 of 20, another great performance for him. And can't emphasize, enough. The Kings, sort of feels like the older guys have that youth. Andrei Kopitar was beating out icing plays as a 37-year-old. Of course, Doughty with a nice rip from the point, and the Kings get a valuable win. So just an update on the standings. Mentioned the Kings will go to Vegas next. They are 9 points back of Vegas, and that margin was a lot closer the last time these two teams played, but the Kings could bring it a little bit closer tomorrow. They have 73 points and still with an amazing home record. In the wild card, the Blues really wanted a win tonight, just 1 point back of Calgary for that second Western wildcard spot. But I have no doubt that the Blues are going to keep playing well, especially with how great their defense was tonight by and large, and they get a point. And so a big win for the Kings, 2-1 on home ice, and a big one to snap the streak. Welcome to LA, Andrei Kuzmenko, and I have faith that the fit will be well for him, and saw some good shifts from the Kings' bottom six, as well as some of the guys on the top. I want to see a little more from the second line. Phil Deneau had a really good look, point blank in that game, and didn't score. Good save by Hofer. But the Kings are looking for that depth scoring. That's been an issue all year. The defense has been there. We'll see how they get shaken up with these line changes, especially going back to the 12-6. And Jim Hiller, one last thing, did not indicate who will start tomorrow against Vegas. And so that'll be a mystery. Maybe it's Riddick. Maybe it's Darcy again. But we'll see, especially, guys burning out at this point in the season, how that shapes out. But thank you guys so much for tuning in to Skate of Thrones. Big win for the Kings, and we'll be back soon with more content. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe, and thank you so much again. So that'll do it for me. I'm Casey Kasliner, and we'll see you in the next one.